This video is a continuation of the exceptions notebook, and we'll discuss raising exceptions. Now, in the previous sections, we've seen examples of the raise keyword, and this keyword is how we raise exceptions. So if we were to write the raise keyword followed by an exception type name, let's say name error, followed by an optional argument list, this causes an exception to be raised and halts execution at this line, passing the exception object along with our arguments up the stack to be handled by the first except clause that matches the exception type. Now, in this case, just like we've seen before, there's no handler, so we simply get the output of the stack trace. And you can see here that our message is output as the argument to the name error exception. If we don't have any arguments to pass, or we don't want to include a message, for instance, we can omit the parentheses and the argument list altogether when raising an exception. So if I say raise value error without the argument list, you see that this still works. Typically, you raise an exception when abnormal behavior occurs within your code, or when a situation arises that is outside the normal logic for your code. However, there are cases where you may want to know if an exception has been raised, even if you have no intent to actually handle it. You can use the raise keyword without any arguments to re-raise an exception. And we've seen an example of this before. But let's say we had a try statement where something caused a name error, for example, to occur. And for this, I'm explicitly going to raise a name error. And in this case, I'm going to explicitly capture the name error, but I could have also used a catch-all, meaning that I can omit the type here and simply have except on its own. And then within the except clause, I'm simply going to output something that tells us that an exception occurred, and then I'm going to use the raise keyword again to re-raise the same exception. And so in the output, we see our message, and then we see the stack trace with the exception information. So there may be cases where you want to handle an exception locally for your own cleanup, but you don't want to prevent code at higher levels from also performing cleanup that may be needed due to this exception. So this gives you the ability to handle an exception and then to re-raise it to pass it up to higher levels of code.